Hi there everyone and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sarah Newman and I'm happy to bring you the 37th episode of Mixed Media the Paper Wishes Way. Today I want to show you a couple of fun techniques using some of our favorite kinds of tools. Stamps and dies from Creative Expressions plus laser cut chipboard from Scrapiniec. We'll do some mixed media with embossing powder, foil, and ink to create personalized designs. I have 3 card projects to share with you today, plus lots of demos too. As you can see, we have a lot to explore and I'm so glad that you're here. Come play with us. Let's take a closer look at our stamp and die combo packs. And we have 4 sets. We'll start with Celebrate, then there's Beautiful, we have Sympathy, and finally, last but not least, Fabulous. So as you can see, each set contains a large word die plus a collection of word and phrase stamps that you can use with the die. So I'll turn this back over and you can see, for example, with this one you could say, "To my fabulous friend," or "You look fabulous," or "Always fabulous," and so on. And you also get either 1 or 2 dies that can be cut to go behind the sentiment. So to provide a little bit of a plaque or a spotlight area for those, which means that you can not only stamp these right onto your paper, you can also stamp them onto these small rectangles and then pop them up with some foam tape. So these are really nice collections and quite handy for card making. Now the other nice thing is that you have a little folder with each of these, and this has project ideas inside. So if you ever need a little creative inspiration, and don't we all, then you've got something ready to go for each one of these, which is really nice. Okay, so let's take a look at how to use these. And I'm going to use the Sympathy set, and we'll take a look at the process for putting these together. Really simple to do. Okay, I'll start with my die, and you can see how nice and large these word dies are. And I'm going to die cut this from a piece of metallic silver cardstock. And what I'm going to do is secure my die onto my cardstock with a little bit of double-sided tape, or with a little bit of low-tack tape, excuse me. Now, if you're new to die cutting, this is the process for cutting dies. Super simple to do. One side of the die will be smooth. The other side will be raised. This is your cutting side. So all you need to do is put that cutting side down, face down, onto the front of your cardstock, and then grab a little bit of this low-tack tape, and I just tear this off. This is from Hunky Dory. I'm never without this tape. It's indispensable if you're doing a lot of die cutting like I do. And then just tack this down. And this will ensure that when I'm running my piece through my die cutting machine, that the die doesn't shift around or come off of my cardstock. I really like to cut my cardstock slightly larger than my die before I run it through, and that way I'm not unnecessarily rolling through a piece of nice cardstock through my machine. This way I'm just cutting through just what I need. And then once I do that, I will have my finished piece that looks like this. And I have to say, these die cut beautifully, and all the innies just really fall right out, which is really nice. They're good quality. So then what I can do is glue this down onto my piece of paper. Now the reason that it's important to choose a heavier weight cardstock for this, you can see the words are quite long, and there's also some narrow detail in here. So if I found that when I'm using really lightweight paper, the end finished result can be a little bit distorted, or it can be kind of easier to pull and tug in a weird way. So it's better to go on the thicker side with your cardstock for this. All right, then the question, of course, is how do I adhere it down? And my favorite way to do this is with the Cosmic Shimmer Specialist glue. It's a nice basic glue, but what I like about the bottle is you've got a really fine little nozzle on here, which means that it's much easier to get the glue where you want it to go rather than all over the place. So when I'm doing this, what I like to do is apply just a little touch of glue to only the wide areas of each letter. So don't worry about getting into the really fine detail areas. If you get the wider areas, you will be fine. So I'm just putting a little bit of glue down on each of those wider sections of each of my letters. Handle it with care. Flip it over and then pop it down. Now with a wet glue, you do have a little bit of wiggle room. So if you need to kind of scooch it around a little bit, you can. And what I also like to do is grab a straight edge, and I'm using my bone folder here, and this will help get things aligned properly. Okay, so a ruler or some other straight edge will do the trick. And this glue does dry clear, so if you find that you get a little bit excess on there, then you are okay too. Okay, so that's the basic process of adhering down those dies, cutting them and gluing them down. Now let's look at the stamps. So I'm going to set this aside to dry, and the stamps come on a really nice little sheet, looks like this. And again, you've got lots of different sentiments on here too. I've just popped one down onto my clear acrylic block, and I can get ready to stamp that. Now with this set, I've got 2 dies that will fit perfectly behind these words. So I've got a smaller one for some of the smaller sentiments and a larger one for some of the larger words. So you've got some mixed fonts in here too, which is really nice. Same process as before with our die cutting. Just pop this down onto your cardstock and run it through your die cutting machine, and you'll have a piece that looks like this. Now what's nice about these is that not only does it cut the shape perfectly, but it also gives you a little bit of a beveled edge or an embossed edge on there, so it gives a really nice polished effect. Okay, now of course the question is, do you die cut first and then stamp, or stamp first and then die cut? Truthfully, you can go either way. I kind of prefer doing the die cutting first and then putting my stamp onto my block and then kind of aiming it down. But the choice is up to you. Okay, so then I just need my stamping ink, and I'll grab my StazOn for this one in black. Ink this up. And then simply position this down like so, and then stamp. Now you may find, because you have a small piece of paper, that it sticks. So just pull that right off. And then you've got your stamped sentiment on there. And then what you can do is, of course, bring this in, and you can simply glue it down, or you can put it up on some foam tape and work this in combination with your die cut word. Now, don't forget, you've got some other sentiments on here too, so you can mix and match those in as well. You can do your stamping directly onto your background piece if you want to, but I really like using those little die cuts for creating kind of a frame around there. I find that it really helps to create a nice visual effect on here too. And this as easy as it can possibly be, great for card making and lots of other crafts as well. So now that we've seen how simple it is for the process, let's take a look at some card ideas. This first card also uses the metallic silver cardstock for the Celebrate die cut word. So that's my focal, and I've surrounded it with stamped and die cut words from the same set. Now you may be looking at this element here, which is the laser cut chipboard. So let's talk about this. So our laser cut chipboard pieces are from Scrapiniec in Poland. I love their chipboard because it's delicate and it's beautiful, but it's also sturdy enough so that you can do some altering. So you can see it comes in a pretty neutral color, which means you can color it yourself in lots of different ways. Or of course, just leave it as is. It looks beautiful as it is too. Now, the ones that I'm using today are all from the Gentle Sunlight range. And in this case, what I'm doing is just adding some foiling and some inking on here. It's a simple technique, but it gives you shine and color. So this is the one that I used for the card. And I'm actually going to demonstrate using the Gentle Sunlight borders because I have some pieces that have been done already in stages. So I wanted you to see how that process goes. So here it is in white. And to do my foiling, of course, I need to have my foil. And I'll use the silver from Wow. This is their fab foil. I also need some adhesive, and I'll be using my glue stick for this. Okay, so I'm going to move aside my card. And also just working onto my craft mat. going to bring in one of those beautiful chipboard elements so you can see how detailed and lovely they are. Now I've cut this out from the backing piece. I find that it's easier to work with just one element unless you're planning on doing the same technique with all of the elements on that sheet. I've cut out a little piece of my foil, just enough to just barely cover that, and I've got my glue on hand. Okay, so all I need to do is just apply my glue stick onto my chipboard. Okay, this is going to give us in this first step kind of a shabby chic look, so don't worry about it being totally perfect. An easy application of glue, and then you're going to place down your foil on here. Shiny side up, okay, and then smooth that down. You really want to make sure that the foil has made contact with that glue. And then what you're going to do is put this underneath something heavy like a book or your plates from your die cutting machine. That can also work too. And then just wait for that glue to dry. Okay, so I do have a piece that's been drying for a couple of minutes, and I'll just pull this out and pull this off. And there you can see that the foil has stuck in some of these areas here. Oh, I will also add, here's my leftover bit of foil, and of course I do save all of these scraps because you can make use of some of that excess foil on there. Now I can leave this as is, kind of a cool shabby chic look, and then pop this out from the backing, and I'll have some really pretty elements to use. But I also want to take advantage of the resist effect of the foil and add some dye ink on here. I'm using the Prism Dusky Rose, and all I need to do is just a direct to paper inking technique and add as much ink or as little as I want on here. That's going to give me a really pretty look. And then just come in with a damp baby wipe or dry tissue, any kind of cloth, to remove the excess ink from the foiled areas. So it's a resist technique, and the foil is your resist. Okay, give that a couple of seconds to dry, and then you can pop it out from your backing piece, and then you will have a piece that looks like this. Kind of depends on how much of the glue you use, how much of the surface is covered with foil, and what kind of ink you use, or what color ink you use. Now definitely do use a dye-based ink. If you use a solvent ink like the StazOn I used earlier, that will actually color the foil too, so probably not the look you're going for. Okay, so let's take another look at our card here. And you can see that I cut that circle element to create a half frame, and then I used sticky specks to adhere the frame to the card front. So whereas I'm using the acrylic glue for the die cut sentiment, I like to use sticky specks for the laser cut. I find that just works a little bit better, and it's able to get all of those little innies and glued down on there. So sticky specks for this, acrylic glue for this part. Now the papers that I'm using throughout the webisode are from the 8x8 Teacups and Roses paper pack, so that provides a really nice background on here. And I've just adhered down all of the elements, and then I inked around the outside edge with one of my favorite ink pads, which is the Silver Pigment ink pad. This is from Crafter's Companion. So I inked around the outside edges, and that just helps tie everything together, as does this little silver bow on here. Then for the card inside, I have more of the colored chipboard on here, another sentiment, and more of that beautiful paper and that silver metallic cardstock. For this card, I have the large word fabulous as my focal, and I die cut this from cardstock from the Teacups and Roses cardstock set. Now I wanted it to have a little bit of extra dimension to go over this chipboard element here, so I cut really tiny pieces of foam tape to use that as backing behind there, just to give a little bit of a lift. Now I have the stamped sentiment up above. This is also on some foam tape. And I've also incorporated a dazzle down here at the bottom. So it reads, "Have a fabulous day." Now the word day, the dazzle, was actually birthday. So I just snipped that apart and was able to do a little bit of mixing and matching here. Now for the chipboard element in the background, this has a nice soft metallic silver. Now this is unlike the high shine of the foil that we just saw, so it gives you a little bit of a different look. And this is because I simply inked it with a silver metallic pigment ink. So again, that beautiful silver metallic ink that I used before in combination with our chipboard. So again, I've got my beautiful chipboard element here, and I've got one of those kind of border treatments that I'm going to be doing my demonstrating on. So all you need to do, pop this down onto your craft mat. Now you can leave it all in the backing sheet if you want to, or not. I find it's easier to have a little something that you can kind of hold on to when you're doing your inking, so that you can kind of have a little bit more control there. So I'm just patting this ink pad directly onto my laser cut piece. Kind of turn this around. Well, we've lost our backing piece, so just set that to one side, never mind. And I'm kind of tapping and whisking a little bit. I'm not, going along here too much because I want to take care of those delicate elements. And then there we go. Now pigment ink does take a little bit longer to dry, so you do want to let this set aside to dry. You can also use a heat tool with it if you want to speed up that dry time a little bit. But a couple of minutes will do the trick, and then you can add this onto your project. Again, I suggest using the sticky specs for this. It's just going to make things a little bit easier there. So for the card front, as you can see, I've got some of that beautiful Teacups and Roses patterned paper on here, a little bow on there as well. I've got some silver inking around the outside edges here. And then for the inside, I've just got some more of those dazzles, which have a really beautiful pearlescent finish to them. And the green, of course, just coordinates really beautifully as well. Our last card features heat embossing, and you can see this here on my heat embossed word beautiful, as well as the laser cut chipboard elements here. Now for this, I'm using the Encrusted Jewels set of embossing powder from Stampendous, and you may remember I did a whole webisode on these and I still had a ton left over, so I thought I'd try them here and they worked perfectly. So the word beautiful is cut from embossed cardstock, and I've used the aged gold for that, and then I've also used the pearl champagne on the chipboard elements. So in the set, you have 5 different little jars in here. Some of them are mica and glitter, and 2 of them are embossing powders. Now the embossing powders come in 2 different sort of grades of embossing powder. So the aged gold is a really thick granule of embossing powder, and it's got some black and some gold in there. The pearl champagne is a really fine grade of embossing powder, so you've got a lot to kind of play with on here. So I'm going to set aside the rest of my kit, and let's take a look at how to heat emboss on our beautiful laser cut elements. So again, just pulling those out of the package, I'm going to be using once again one of the borders here so that we can see. I'm going to move aside my card and get out a couple of other elements. So for this one, I'm going to use the really fine grade of embossing powder. This is the pearl champagne. So I have that on hand. I have a folded piece of scrap paper that's going to catch my excess embossing powder. Got my heat tool, and I've got my embossing ink pad. Working onto my craft mat, which is of course going to protect my work surface from ink, but also from heat. So this is a heat resistant ink pad, which is what we're going to need. And I'm just pressing that ink pad, that embossing ink pad, onto the chipboard. So in the same way that we did with our metallic silver ink, same process. Okay. And again, I've kept this kind of in the backing sheet a bit, just so I have something to hang on to. All right. Then open this up. Take my embossing powder and just sprinkle this on here. So I don't need to worry about whether I'm using too much embossing powder, because of course that scrap paper can just funnel it all right back into the jar. Okay, so I'm going to tap that off, and you can see where I've got all of my embossing powder on here. Okay, now here comes the magical part. Let's get this back into the jar. This is where you can see you get a really good value with your embossing powders because you can just funnel everything right back in there and nothing goes to waste. Okay, make sure the lid is on. Very important step. And then grab your heat tool and simply heat set. So hang in there with me for a second. I'll heat set this and we will take a look at what the result is. All right, so my piece is all heat set, and this is hot right now, so this is molten embossing powder. So you do want to make sure that you're handling it carefully. You can see I'm sort of hanging on to this unembossed area here. Once this cools, then you can just pop it out of your backing piece and you've got a beautifully gilded embossed accent to work with. So that's how simple it is to do with our laser cut chipboard. So then once you've got that, got a couple of those, you can add them right onto the front of your card. Now the word beautiful, as I mentioned, this is also heat set, and this is using the aged gold. So this is the one that's got the variation of texture as well as color. It's got some black embossing powder in there along with this kind of rich, beautiful gold. Now to do this, really simple, same kind of process. I took a piece of white cardstock, just plain cardstock, whatever you have on hand, and pressed that embossing ink pad right on top, just like we saw with the laser cut chipboard. Added the aged gold on here, and then simply grab your die, pop it down, adhere it, and run it through your die cutting machine. Now, as we mentioned before, you want to use some thicker weight cardstock, and adding the embossing powder also adds some thickness on there. So it does give a little bit more stability in there as well. Super simple way to add a really nice medium to your cards. Now I also went around the outside edge of my card with that same aged gold just to give a little bit more texture on there. And you can see here I've got the You're Beautiful, and then I've got the rest of my sentiment on here. Some more of those beautiful pattern papers, and it's a really simple and nice card focal. Then on my card inside, I've got some more of the embossed chipboard, again using that pearl, and then again some more of the words and die cutting. Super simple, easy to do, and a really fun way to mix your media. So I think you have seen with our card projects today how fun and versatile these stamps, dies, and chipboard elements are, and how many great techniques you can do with them. A big thank you to our friends at Creative Expressions and Scrapiniec for these really beautiful and inspiring supplies. And thank you so much for joining me today. We're really glad that you're here, and we're so happy that you're part of the Paper Wishes family. Do feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you think. Each item can be purchased separately, and you can see them below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. For the money saver, just see this webisode on paperwishes.com.